Camille Brooks? She probably can't even afford to step inside this gala. Alexander Whitmore smiled as he said it, surrounded by people wearing designer suits and holding crystal glasses, never realizing that the woman he was mocking was about to arrive in a way that would change everything. For 3 years, Alexander had told himself the same story. He was the one who moved on. He was the one who won. And Camille was the woman who lost everything when their marriage ended. But what he never understood was that silence was never the same thing as weakness. The night of the Whitmore Foundation Gala was supposed to be Alexander's biggest victory. The ballroom of the Manhattan Grand Hotel was glowing beneath hundreds of golden lights. Business leaders, celebrities, and investors filled the room, all gathered to celebrate Alexander's latest achievement. At 39 years old, he was the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing financial technology companies in the country. Cameras followed him everywhere. Reporters called him a visionary. And standing beside him was Victoria Hayes, the woman everyone expected him to marry next. Victoria smiled as photographers captured their picture. "You finally have the life you deserve," she whispered. Alexander looked around the room, enjoying every second of attention. "I built this myself," he said proudly. "Everything I have came from hard work." Nobody in that room knew how much of that success had once been built with Camille standing quietly behind him. Years earlier, before the private offices and magazine covers, Alexander was just a man with a dream and a small company struggling to survive. Camille had been there during the sleepless nights, the rejected proposals, and the moments when he almost gave up. She was the person who reminded him he was capable when he doubted himself. She handled the details he ignored. She encouraged him when nobody else believed in him. But after Alexander became successful, something changed. The woman who had helped him build his world slowly became someone he wanted to hide from it. "You don't understand the people I have to deal with now," he once told her during an argument. Camille remembered those words because they hurt more than the divorce papers that came later. She had looked at the man she loved and realized he no longer saw her as his partner. He saw her as something that belonged to his past. The divorce was quiet. No dramatic scene. No public fight. Just a stack of papers on a table and a man convinced he was making the smartest decision of his life. "You'll be okay," Alexander told her. "You've always been good at adapting." Camille had looked at him for a long moment and simply replied, "You still don't know me." Then she walked away. Alexander thought that was the end of her story. He thought the woman leaving with one suitcase and a quiet goodbye had nowhere else to go. What he never knew was that Camille had spent her entire life protecting a secret that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with finding herself again. Now, standing beneath the lights of the gala, Alexander raised his glass as guests applauded him. He believed the past was behind him. He believed Camille Brooks was just a forgotten chapter. Then his assistant walked over, looking unusually nervous. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly, holding a tablet. "There's something you need to see." Alexander glanced down at the screen. His expression changed when he saw the guest list. One name had been added to the VIP arrivals. Camille Brooks. He laughed softly. "She's coming here?" His assistant hesitated. "Yes, sir. But there's more." Outside the hotel, a private aircraft was already preparing for arrival. And for the first time in years, Alexander Whitmore felt something he had not expected. Uncertainty. Because the woman he believed had nothing left was about to walk back into his world. And this time, she was not coming back as his ex-wife. She was coming back as someone he never imagined she could become. The last time Alexander Whitmore saw Camille Brooks walk away, he believed he was watching the end of her story. He never imagined he was watching the beginning of his own downfall. 3 years earlier, Camille had left their marriage with a small suitcase, a quiet goodbye, and a heart full of questions she never received answers to. She did not leave because she had no options. She left because she finally understood that staying with someone who no longer respected her was costing her more than walking away. But Alexander never saw it that way. To him, Camille was simply the woman who could not keep up with the life he created. Back then, Alexander was already changing. His company was growing. His name was appearing in business magazines, and every new success seemed to convince him that he was becoming someone too important to look back. Camille noticed the small changes first. The way he stopped asking about her day. The way conversations became more about his schedule than their life together. The way he started introducing her as if she was a piece of his past instead of the person who stood beside him during the hardest years. One evening, Camille sat across from him at their dining table, looking at the man she once believed would always choose her. "Alexander, do you still see me as your partner?" she asked. He looked surprised by the question. "Of course I do." But his answer came too quickly. Camille knew him well enough to hear what he was not saying. A few weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. Alexander expected anger. He expected tears. He expected her to fight for the life they built together. Instead, Camille simply read the documents, placed them down, and took a deep breath. "That is really what you want?" she asked. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Camille, this is not about wanting to hurt you. It is about being realistic. We are just different people now." Different people. Those words stayed with her. Because she realized he was not saying they had changed. He was saying he had decided he was better. After the divorce was finalized, Alexander moved forward quickly. He bought a luxury penthouse overlooking the city, expanded his company, and surrounded himself with people who constantly reminded him how successful he had become. Meanwhile, Camille disappeared from the spotlight. There were no interviews, no social media posts, no desperate attempts to prove she was doing well. She simply rebuilt her life quietly. For months, people who knew Alexander assumed Camille was struggling. Some even whispered that she had made a mistake leaving with so little. They did not know the truth. They did not know Camille had spent years hiding a part of herself that almost nobody knew existed. She had grown up learning that money could change how people treated you. Her family had built a powerful financial legacy, but Camille wanted something different. She wanted to know if someone could love her without knowing her last name. That was why she never told Alexander about the trust created by her family. She wanted a real marriage, not a relationship built around wealth. And for a while, she believed she had found it. Until she realized Alexander loved the future he imagined more than the woman who helped him get there. Now, sitting in the back of a quiet car on the way to the gala, Camille looked out at the city lights. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. She was not nervous because she had something to prove. She was calm because she no longer needed his approval. Marcus Bennett, her family attorney, glanced at her from the front seat. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. Camille looked at the invitation resting beside her. "I am not going there to embarrass him," she said softly. "I am going there because I spent years letting him decide who I was." Marcus nodded. "And tonight?" Camille looked toward the skyline. "Tonight, I decide for myself." At that exact moment, inside the gala, Alexander was still telling people he had made the right choice. He was still laughing, still celebrating, still believing Camille was the same woman he left behind. But outside the city, a private aircraft was preparing to land. And soon, everyone in that ballroom would learn the truth Alexander never bothered to discover. Camille Brooks had never been powerless. She had only been silent. The night before Camille Brooks stepped back into Alexander Whitmore's world, she sat alone in the quiet of her hotel suite, looking at a photograph she had not touched in years. It was an old picture from the beginning of their marriage. In it, Alexander was smiling without pressure, without cameras, without the weight of a company on his shoulders. And Camille was standing beside him, believing she had finally found someone who saw her for who she truly was. She remembered that version of him. The man who stayed up late talking about dreams. The man who promised they would build something together. The man who once told her, "I do not care about what you have. I care about who you are." Those words were the reason she kept her family's wealth a secret. Camille had grown up surrounded by privilege, but she never wanted to be loved because of a bank account or a famous family name. Her father, Robert Brooks, had built one of the most respected investment firms in the country. But Camille had watched money change people. She saw friendships become transactions and relationships become negotiations. So when she met Alexander, she made a choice. She would not introduce herself as the daughter of a wealthy family. She would simply be Camille, a woman with her own dreams, a woman who wanted a normal life. For a while, it worked. Alexander loved her confidence, her kindness, and the way she believed in him before anyone else did. When his company struggled in the beginning, Camille was the person who stayed. She helped him organize his early business plans, reviewed presentations late at night, and reminded him that failure was not the end. "You make me believe I can actually do this," Alexander once told her. Camille smiled and answered, "You can. You just have to remember why you started." But success changed him slowly. It did not happen overnight. That was what made it harder. There was no single moment when Camille could say, "This is when everything ended." It was a collection of small moments. The missed dinners. The forgotten promises. The way Alexander started caring more about how their life looked from the outside than how it felt inside. Then came the day he told her she was holding him back. Camille still remembered sitting across from him in their living room, trying to understand how the person she supported for years could look at her like an obstacle. "I sacrificed a lot for us," she said quietly. Alexander sighed. "Camille, I appreciate that. But we are not the same people anymore." She looked at him carefully. "No. You just became someone who forgot who was standing beside you." Those were the last serious words they shared before the divorce. After she left, Camille returned to the one place where she could finally stop pretending. Her family welcomed her back, but they did not tell her what to do. They knew Camille needed more than money. She needed to rebuild her confidence. Marcus Bennett, her family's longtime attorney, helped her understand the full responsibility waiting for her. "Your father always believed you would choose your own path," Marcus told her. "He knew you were not interested in showing the world what you owned. He wanted you to understand what you were capable of." Over time, Camille stepped into a role she had avoided for years. She learned the business. She studied investments. She made decisions. She discovered that she was not just someone protected by wealth. She was someone capable of creating change with it. Now, as the gala approached, Camille looked at herself in the mirror. She was not the woman Alexander left behind. But she also was not trying to become someone else. She was still Camille. The difference was that she finally understood her own worth. Marcus entered the room and handed her the final schedule. "The arrival is confirmed," he said. "The media will be there. The investors will be there. Alexander will definitely notice." Camille folded the paper and smiled slightly. "That is not why I am going." Marcus looked at her. "Then why?" Camille picked up her coat and answered calmly. "Because for 3 years, he told himself a story about me. Tonight, he finally gets to hear the truth." Outside, the city continued moving as if nothing had changed. But inside the gala hall, Alexander Whitmore was still celebrating a victory that was never really his. And he had no idea that the woman he thought he understood was about to become the one person he could no longer ignore. Inside the Manhattan Grand Hotel, everything looked exactly the way Alexander Whitmore wanted it to look. Every detail had been carefully arranged. The lights were warm, the music was elegant, and every guest walking through the ballroom doors represented another connection to power and success. To Alexander, this night was proof that he had made the right choices. He stood near the entrance, shaking hands with investors and smiling for cameras. "This is what happens when you stop holding yourself back," he told one of his business partners. "Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions to reach the next level." His partner nodded, unaware of how much those words revealed about the man standing in front of him. Across the room, Victoria Hayes admired the attention surrounding them. She loved the way people looked at Alexander. She loved being connected to his name. "Everyone is talking about us tonight," she said with a smile. Alexander looked pleased. "They should. We built something impressive." But what Alexander did not realize was that the same confidence that made him successful was also the reason he failed to see what was happening around him. He believed people were only valuable when they added something to his image. And for years, he had convinced himself that Camille was someone who belonged to a chapter he had already closed. Meanwhile, outside the city, Camille Brooks was preparing for the moment she had avoided for 3 years. She sat quietly in the back of the car as it moved toward the private airport. The city lights reflected across the window, but her mind was somewhere else. Marcus Bennett noticed her silence. "You do not have to do this if you are not ready," he said. Camille looked at him and smiled softly. "I spent 3 years being ready for everyone else. Tonight, I am ready for myself." At the airport, everything was calm. There were no crowds, no cameras, no dramatic announcement. Just a private aircraft waiting on the runway. Camille walked toward it with the same quiet confidence she had carried all her life. She was not trying to become someone new. She was finally allowing the world to see who she had always been. Back at the gala, Alexander continued enjoying the evening. He accepted compliments, answered questions from reporters, and listened as guests praised his rise in the business world. Then one of the event coordinators approached him. "Mr. Whitmore, there has been a change to the arrival schedule." Alexander barely looked away from the conversation. "What kind of change?" The coordinator hesitated. "The VIP guest has arrived." Alexander smiled. "Which guest?" The coordinator glanced toward the entrance. "Camille Brooks." For a moment, Alexander did not react. Then he laughed quietly. Camille. Victoria turned toward him. Your ex-wife? Yes, Alexander said. I have no idea why she would come here. The people around them exchanged curious looks. Some remembered Camille as the quiet woman who disappeared after the divorce. Some remembered the rumors that she had struggled after leaving Alexander's life. Alexander noticed their reactions and felt confident again. He leaned closer to Victoria and said, She probably wants to prove something. But what Alexander did not understand was that Camille was not arriving to prove she was better than him. She was arriving because she no longer needed him to define her. Outside the hotel, the private aircraft approached the runway. The engines grew louder as it moved closer. Inside the ballroom, conversations slowly faded as guests noticed something unusual happening near the entrance. A staff member walked quickly toward the main doors. Another checked the guest list. The atmosphere changed. Alexander looked toward the entrance, still expecting the same woman he remembered. The woman who stayed quiet. The woman who walked away without fighting. The woman he thought he had left behind. Then the doors began to open. And for the first time in years, Alexander Whitmore had no idea what was about to happen next. The ballroom fell silent as the doors opened. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The music continued softly in the background, but the attention of every person in the room shifted toward the entrance. Alexander Whitmore stood frozen, waiting to see the same Camille Brooks he remembered. The woman who left quietly. The woman he believed had lost everything. But the person who stepped inside was not the woman he expected. Camille walked into the gala with calm confidence, wearing a simple but elegant gown that reflected who she had become. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was not looking around for approval. She carried herself like someone who finally understood her own value. Behind her, Marcus Bennett followed with a professional calmness that immediately caught the attention of several guests. Whispers moved through the room. Is that really Camille Brooks? Someone asked. I thought she disappeared after the divorce. Alexander stared at her, unable to hide his confusion. For the first time that night, the confidence on his face began to fade. Victoria looked from Camille to Alexander. You did not tell me she would be here. Alexander barely responded. I did not know she was coming. Camille continued walking through the room, greeting people who approached her. Some guests recognized her immediately. Others looked confused because the woman standing before them did not match the story they had heard. For years, people had repeated the same assumptions. Camille was the ex-wife who could not keep up. Camille was the woman who walked away from a successful man. Camille was the person who lost when the marriage ended. But tonight, those assumptions started falling apart. A respected investor named Richard Collins approached her with a smile. Ms. Brooks, it has been a long time. It is an honor to see you here. Camille smiled politely. Thank you, Richard. It is good to see you too. Alexander noticed the exchange from across the room. His expression changed. He knew Richard Collins did not speak to people casually. The man was known for working only with serious business leaders. Victoria leaned closer. Who is she connected to? Alexander looked uncomfortable. I do not know. And that answer bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Because for the first time since the divorce, Alexander realized there were parts of Camille's life he knew nothing about. Camille finally reached the center of the ballroom. The same place where Alexander had spent the last hour accepting praise and attention. But now, all eyes were on her. The event coordinator stepped forward with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue tonight's program, we would like to welcome our special guest and the newest partner supporting this year's foundation initiative. Alexander looked toward the stage, confused. The coordinator smiled. Please welcome Camille Brooks. The room filled with applause. Not loud because people were trying to be polite. Loud because many of them understood that someone important had just arrived. Camille stepped onto the stage. She looked across the crowd and briefly met Alexander's eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He remembered the woman who once asked him if he still saw her as his partner. He remembered the woman he thought would always need him. But standing there now, he saw someone different. Not because she had changed into expensive clothes. Not because people were applauding her. But because she no longer looked at him like she needed anything from him. The coordinator handed her the microphone. Would you like to say a few words? Camille looked around the room. Thank you for welcoming me tonight. I believe every person deserves the chance to become who they truly are, even after others decide they already know their story. The words were simple, but Alexander felt them deeply. Because he knew he had been one of those people. He had decided he knew Camille's story. He had decided she was finished. He had decided she was nothing without him. And now, standing in front of everyone, he was beginning to realize his biggest mistake was not losing a wealthy woman. His biggest mistake was never understanding the woman he had beside him. Then the coordinator announced the next part of the evening. We would also like to recognize the Brooks Foundation and its leadership team. Alexander's eyes narrowed. The name sounded familiar. Too familiar. Marcus stepped forward beside Camille. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the woman behind the foundation's recent expansion. He paused. Camille Brooks. The room erupted in applause. And for the first time that night, Alexander Whitmore understood that Camille had not returned to his world because she needed a place in it. She had returned because she already had one. The applause inside the ballroom continued, but Alexander Whitmore barely heard it. The sound that filled the room was not what bothered him. It was the realization that everyone around him seemed to know something he did not. For years, Alexander believed he understood Camille Brooks completely. He believed he knew her limits, her dreams, and what kind of life she could have without him. But standing there, watching people treat her with respect, he felt a question he had avoided for years. What else did he never know about her? Camille stepped down from the stage as guests approached her. Business leaders who had spent the evening trying to get Alexander's attention now wanted a moment with her. They asked about her foundation, her investments, and her plans for the future. Alexander watched from a distance, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Who was she working with? Victoria asked quietly. Alexander looked at her. I do not know. Victoria's expression changed. That answer was unusual. Alexander always knew everything happening around him. He built his reputation on being prepared. But tonight, Camille was the one person he could not read. A few minutes later, Alexander finally approached her. He walked through the crowd with the same confidence he had carried all night. But something was different now. He was not walking toward an ex-wife he thought needed an explanation. He was walking toward a woman who no longer needed anything from him. Camille, he said. She turned around calmly. Alexander. The way she said his name surprised him. There was no anger, no bitterness, no attempt to hurt him. Just calm. I did not expect to see you here, he said. Camille gave a small smile. I noticed. Alexander looked around the room. You seem to have built quite a life. I have, she answered. He paused, searching for the right words. Why did you never tell me? Camille studied his face. Tell you what? About all of this. He gestured around the room. Your connections. Your foundation. Your family. For a moment, Camille said nothing. She remembered the years when she had wanted him to see her as more than her background. She remembered hoping he loved the person, not the possibilities. Because I wanted to know if you loved me without knowing my last name, she finally said. The answer hit harder than Alexander expected. He looked away for a moment. You could have helped the company. You could have changed everything. Camille nodded slowly. That is exactly why I never told you. Alexander frowned. What do you mean? I wanted a husband, Alexander. Not someone who stayed because my family could open doors for him. The room around them continued moving, but for Alexander, everything felt quieter. He remembered all the times Camille supported him when he had nothing. He remembered her believing in him before anyone knew his name. And suddenly, the story he had told himself for years started to fall apart. Across the room, Marcus Bennett watched quietly. He knew this moment was not about money. It was about truth. Camille had spent years being judged by someone who never bothered to truly understand her. Meanwhile, Alexander had spent years believing success made him smarter than everyone around him. But now he was facing the one person who had seen him before the success. Camille, he said softly, I made mistakes. She looked at him. Everyone makes mistakes. Alexander hoped those words meant there was still a chance. But Camille continued. The problem was never that you made one mistake. The problem was that you kept choosing the same mistake every day. Alexander had no answer, because he knew she was right. Later that evening, as guests continued celebrating, Alexander stepped outside onto the hotel balcony. The city stretched below him, the same city he once believed he controlled. But for the first time in years, he felt uncertain. Inside the ballroom, Camille was surrounded by people who respected her, not because of what she could give them, not because of her family name, but because of what she had built herself. And Alexander finally understood the truth he had ignored for too long. He did not lose Camille when she became powerful. He lost her the moment he stopped seeing her value. The morning after the gala, Alexander Whitmore woke up to a feeling he had not experienced in years. Uncertainty. For a man who built his entire career on knowing the next move, that feeling bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He stood in his penthouse overlooking Manhattan, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the city below. For years, he believed he was the person who had moved forward. But after seeing Camille Brooks again, he realized something uncomfortable. She had moved forward too, maybe even further than he had. His phone continued filling with messages from investors, business partners, and colleagues discussing the gala. But one message caught his attention. It was from his assistant. Mr. Whitmore, the Brooks Foundation Partnership Review has been requested by several investors. Alexander read the message twice. His expression changed. The Brooks Foundation was no longer just a name he heard at a charity event. It was connected to major financial groups, respected investors, and companies that could influence the future of his own business. He immediately called his assistant. "Why are investors asking about this?" he asked. "Because they are interested in working with Ms. Brooks," she replied. "Her organization has been expanding quickly. People want to understand her strategy." Alexander leaned back in his chair. And why did nobody know about this before? There was a pause. Because she kept everything private. Those words stayed with him. Camille had spent years keeping her success quiet while he had spent years making sure everyone saw his. At his office later that day, Alexander sat through a meeting that felt completely different from the ones he was used to. His executives noticed his distraction. "Are you concerned about the partnership?" one of them asked. Alexander looked up. "No, I am just making sure we understand all the details." But the truth was, he was trying to understand Camille. He was trying to understand how the woman he dismissed had become someone his entire business world respected. Meanwhile, Camille was not thinking about Alexander at all. She was focused on the foundation meeting happening that afternoon. She sat at the head of the conference table, reviewing plans, asking questions, and making decisions. Marcus watched quietly from the side. "You know," he said after the meeting ended, 3 years ago, you would not have imagined yourself sitting here." Camille smiled. 3 years ago, I was trying to figure out who I was without him." Marcus nodded. "And now?" Camille looked through the glass windows at the city. "Now I know." That evening, Alexander asked to meet with her privately. Camille agreed, not because she expected anything from him, but because she wanted closure. They met at a quiet restaurant away from the attention of the gala. Alexander looked different, less confident, more thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," he said. Camille listened, but did not interrupt. "I thought I knew what was best for my life. I thought success meant leaving behind anything that slowed me down." He paused. "I was wrong." Camille looked at him calmly. "You were not wrong because you wanted success, Alexander. You were wrong because you believed I was the thing standing in your way." He looked down. He knew there was no argument against that. "I should have seen you differently." Camille nodded. "Yes, you should have." For the first time, Alexander did not try to defend himself. He did not explain. He simply accepted the truth. But while Alexander was focused on repairing something he had already damaged, the business world around him was beginning to change. Investors who once followed him without question were now asking different questions. They wanted stability. They wanted leadership. They wanted to know more about the decisions he made behind closed doors. And slowly, Alexander began to realize that losing Camille was not the only consequence of his choices. He had built a reputation on being untouchable, but now people were looking closer. And the woman he underestimated was no longer just someone from his past. She was becoming the one person who could reveal exactly how much he had lost. Camille never planned to destroy Alexander. She did not need revenge to prove her worth. Her success was already the answer. But Alexander was about to learn that when someone spends years underestimating a person, the biggest surprise is not their success. It is realizing they never truly knew them at all. Alexander Whitmore had spent years believing that losing Camille Brooks was the price of becoming successful. But now, sitting alone in his office late at night, he was beginning to wonder if success had actually cost him something far more valuable. The city outside his window was still alive, filled with lights and movement. But inside the room, everything felt different. His company was still standing. His name was still respected. But the confidence he once carried everywhere had started to disappear. The questions from investors became more frequent. The conversations became more careful. People who once accepted every decision he made were now asking for explanations. And Alexander knew exactly when everything started changing. The night Camille walked back into his world. Meanwhile, Camille Brooks continued building the future she had created for herself. She did not celebrate Alexander's struggles. She did not check business reports hoping to see him fail. That was never who she was. Her focus was on the foundation, her investments, and the people who depended on her decisions. One afternoon, Marcus Bennett placed a report on her desk. "There is something you should know," he said. Camille looked up. "About Alexander?" Marcus nodded. "His investors are reviewing several decisions from the past few years." Camille slowly closed the folder in front of her. "I hope he learns from it." Marcus studied her expression. "You really do not want him to lose everything?" Camille shook her head. "No, I wanted him to understand what he lost. Those are two different things." That answer stayed with Marcus because it showed how much Camille had changed. The woman who once questioned her own value was now someone who understood the difference between justice and revenge. A few days later, Alexander asked to meet again. This time, he was not trying to explain himself. He was trying to listen. They sat across from each other in a quiet coffee shop in downtown Manhattan. No cameras, no investors, no people watching. Just two people facing the truth of what happened between them. "I have been thinking about what you said," Alexander admitted. Camille looked at him. "Which part?" He took a moment before answering. "That I never really saw you." Camille stayed silent. "I thought I knew everything about you," he continued. "I thought I understood your goals, your limits, your place in my life. But I was wrong." For once, Alexander was not speaking like a CEO. He was speaking like a man who finally recognized his mistakes. "I should have respected you before I knew your family name," he said. Camille looked down for a moment, remembering all the times she wished he would say something like that when it mattered. "Alexander, the hardest part was never the divorce." He looked at her. "Then what was?" "Realizing the person I trusted most was the person who believed the least in me." The words were quiet, but they carried years of disappointment. Alexander lowered his eyes. He had no defense, because he knew there was truth in every word. Later that week, another surprise came. Victoria Hayes, who had once enjoyed standing beside Alexander at every public event, began distancing herself. The attention that attracted her was fading. The image of a perfect future was becoming harder to maintain. Alexander finally understood something he had ignored for years. Some people loved the version of him that looked successful. Camille had loved the version of him before anyone knew his name, and he had thrown that away. One evening, Alexander visited the same neighborhood where he and Camille had lived after their marriage. He stood outside the old building, remembering a time when life was much simpler. Back then, they did not have luxury. They did not have influence. They only had each other. And somehow, he had forgotten that was the part that mattered most. But memories could not change the past. They could only reveal what someone failed to appreciate. Camille had already moved forward. She had built a life based on confidence, purpose, and peace. Alexander was finally seeing the truth. He did not lose her because she became powerful. He lost her because he stopped seeing her value when she was standing right beside him. And now, for the first time, he had to face the consequences of a choice he once believed was his greatest achievement. 3 months had passed since the night Camille Brooks walked into the gala and changed the way everyone saw her. But the biggest change was not what happened in that ballroom. It was what happened afterward, in the quiet moments when nobody was watching. Alexander Whitmore was no longer chasing the image of the man who had everything. He was learning what it meant to become someone better. His company recovered slowly, but the way he led it was different. He listened more. He asked questions instead of assuming he already had the answers. People around him noticed the change, but Alexander knew one thing clearly. Some mistakes could be corrected. Others could only be understood. One afternoon, he received an invitation to a foundation event hosted by Camille. For a few seconds, he simply stared at her name on the invitation. A year earlier, he would have wondered why she was there. Now, he understood the question was different. The question was why he had failed to see her all along. At the event, Camille stood in front of a room filled with young entrepreneurs and community leaders. She spoke about opportunity, second chances, and the importance of believing in people before the world recognizes them. "Success is not measured by how many people know your name," she said. "It is measured by how many lives become better because you were there." Alexander listened from the back of the room. He realized those words described the woman he once had beside him, the woman who believed in him before anyone else did. After the event, Alexander approached her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no anger between them anymore, just the understanding that they had both changed. "You are doing incredible things," Alexander said. Camille smiled. "Thank you." He looked around at the people she had helped. "I used to think power was about being the person everyone looked up to." Camille waited. "I was wrong," he continued. "Power is knowing who you are even when nobody is looking." Camille nodded softly. "That is something I had to learn too." Alexander took a breath. "I am sorry, Camille." This time, he did not say it because he wanted something back. He said it because he finally understood the damage caused by not valuing someone when they were standing beside him. Camille looked at him for a long moment. "I forgive you, Alexander." He looked surprised. "You do?" She nodded. Forgiveness is not about pretending nothing happened. It is about refusing to let the past control your future. Those words stayed with him. Because for years, Alexander had been controlled by his own pride. He thought winning meant proving he was right. He thought success meant leaving behind anyone who could not follow his pace. But the greatest lesson of his life came from the person he underestimated the most. Camille never needed to prove she was valuable. She always was. She just stopped waiting for someone else to recognize it. Years later, people would remember the night a private aircraft arrived at a gala and changed everything. They would remember the shocked expressions, the whispers, and the moment Alexander Whitmore realized the woman he dismissed had built a world beyond his imagination. But Camille remembered something different. She remembered the woman she was before that night, the woman who felt invisible, the woman who questioned whether she was enough. And she remembered the moment she finally understood that her worth was never determined by someone else's opinion. Because sometimes the person who walks away quietly is not the person who lost. Sometimes they are the person who finally found themselves. And that was the truth Alexander learned too late. He did not lose Camille because she became powerful. He lost her because he failed to recognize the power she already had. The greatest revenge was never watching someone fall. It was building a life so meaningful that you no longer need to look back.